Scotland's iconic Atlantic salmon is an extraordinary and mysterious fish. Over millennia, people have wondered how it's able to survive in both fresh and salt water. It navigates thousands of miles to feeding grounds in the northern Atlantic Ocean before returning to the exact river of its birthplace. Its migration is nothing less than heroic. Its dramatic leaps at waterfalls offer a wildlife spectacle no other fish can match. Its presence or absence is a vital indicator of the health of our rivers and seas. Atlantic salmon bring tourists from all over the world to watch its gigantic leaps over wild Scottish waterfalls as it returns to its birthplace. Well-travelled anglers come to Scotland's rivers year after year to try to catch this resilient fish, marvel at its strength and beauty, releasing it to swim to its spawning ground and its destiny. Its existence is a major contributor to the rural Scottish economy, especially on the mighty River Tay and its tributaries. But worryingly, salmon numbers are falling steadily, year on year, to the point that extinction is a real possibility within our lifetime. We simply must not let this icon disappear. That would be a tragedy. How could we live with ourselves knowing that we'd contributed to the Scottish salmon's extinction? We need positive action to save our beloved Scottish salmon, and doing nothing is not an option. It's absolutely intrinsic to our Scottish identity. The Tay Ghillies Association, a Scottish charity, is dedicated to saving the Atlantic salmon and its environment. Tay Ghillies, with their incredible experience, aim to highlight the salmon's plight to a global audience. We genuinely believe people will rise up to protect the wild salmon against the dreadfully selfish and cruel challenges the salmon face. History has shown that if we do not protect Scotland's rural economies through economic and social investment, it has a detrimental effect on communities and especially on our young people. If wild Atlantic salmon becomes extinct, it will decimate rural communities around Scotland's rivers and seas. Rural housing will become unsustainable and young people will have bleak futures if they stay in their community. The outcome, as proven in the past, is that young people will move away looking for jobs elsewhere. Schools will close and the heart will be ripped out of Scotland's traditional rural culture. It's a devastating downward spiral. No salmon means an economic impact for Scotland in the region of £150 million per year. The social and cultural damage of the loss of around 4,000 rural jobs is immeasurable. It will devastate the communities which rely on salmon for their living and well-being. To put this economic impact into perspective, it's useful to make a comparison with the Scottish rugby team. The Six Nations rugby tournament brings £60 million per year to Scotland. Just like Atlantic salmon, it also provides sporting entertainment, but with less than half the economic benefit, 70% of which is invested around Edinburgh. By comparison, if we allow salmon to become extinct, rural Scotland may have nothing else to rely upon, and our young people in particular will walk away from their beautiful communities, perhaps never to return. Some say it could be the next Highland clearance. Whilst nobody really knows what happens at sea, it's clear that the numbers of wild Atlantic salmon returning from sea to Scottish rivers is in steep decline. Perhaps as a consequence of herring and mackerel bycatch, or perhaps being caught by foreign boats in the North Atlantic. We simply can't tell how much damage is being done to the wild Atlantic salmon at sea. The commercial fishing community in Scotland is very aware of the need to protect the wild Atlantic salmon. Fishermen are doing their level best to protect it. Commercial fishing provides a huge economic benefit around Scotland's coastal communities. We hope that everyone can work together to protect the iconic wild Atlantic salmon. Once it's gone, it's too late to think about how we can save it. Let's all work together to save our salmon and the rural communities that depend upon it. A world in which we can protect everyone's interest is a world in which our social, economic and emotional well-being is protected for future generations. The Atlantic salmon's survival will be an indicator of how smart we are. Future generations will look to us to protect it. Our children and grandchildren will judge our ability to be protective custodians of Scotland's King of the Fish. The wild Atlantic salmon is not only an indicator species for the health of our rivers, but also an indicator of the physical and emotional health of our nation. The benefits of angling for emotional and physical well-being are well documented. It can make a unique contribution to a person's well-being. It covers all 4 positive mental health and well-being pillars. Therapeutic engagement with nature and green-blue spaces can have a positive effect on subjective happiness, satisfaction, relaxation levels, and overall emotional well-being. Angling supports personal development in young people to help develop resilience and coping skills. It can also provide a sense of purpose and a network of positive relationships to improve their psychological well-being.
My name's Callum King and I started fishing around about 10, I was about 10 years old and I just absolutely love it. You know, from there on I went on to become a gillie, now the under gillie at Tay Mount. I started off gillieing down at Benkel and that is about 9 years ago. So I've been 7 years at Tay Mount and I just absolutely love it. You know, it's the job of my dreams.
Members take on new responsibilities and engage in volunteering or coaching. These roles are so important for social well-being. Physical exertion linked to walking, wading in the water, and from repeatedly casting and retrieving increases physical health, especially for older members of our community. NHS-led mental health campaigns, such as the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, have championed a range of social engagements including ecotherapy, green-blue exercise and mindfulness. Angling is a clear link to all 3 and provides therapeutic benefits for a wide range of clinical issues. Few other sports have the potential to solve so many well-being issues for young and old alike. We now know that ADHD, self-harm and suicidal ideation in young men in particular has increased dramatically since the COVID pandemic. Depression, low mood and self-esteem issues are rising at an alarming rate. Angling can help so much to address these issues. Veterans returning from combat, often with combat-related PTSD, find angling really helpful to improve their well-being. Anxiety-related disorders and dementia can be helped through engaging with active ageing, accessible through getting out onto the river and participation in angling. The angling community is developing sessions for different demographics such as women only. Work is also being done to encourage Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. Ghillies and anglers support inclusivity, welcoming all demographics, genders, ethnic minorities, able-bodied and those with disabilities.
So that'll be a test of the inclusivity of the river. If I can get my 82-year-old mother down somewhere near the river, that would be really, really good. She'd love that. She'd absolutely love it.
Wild Atlantic salmon, the king of fish in Scotland's rivers, has in December 2023 been declared an endangered species for the first time by an international conservation body. British salmon populations have plummeted by up to half between 2006 and 2020, accelerating a trend that has spanned 3 generations, according to the International Union for Conservation of Nature. In Scotland, where more than 170 rivers once boasted healthy populations, numbers declined by 58%, with climate change affecting salmon at all stages of their migratory life cycle. The IUCN have identified a number of key pressures faced by Atlantic salmon: poor water quality, dams and barriers, and invasive non-native species such as Pacific pink salmon. It also cites an increasing threat from salmon farms situated mostly on the west coast of Scotland. We recognise the economic impact of farm salmon to the Scottish economy and hope that both farm salmon and wild salmon can flourish into the future. It should be possible. However, often driven by profit motives, farm salmon companies look to increase the number of salmon in feed pens to maximum levels in pursuit of profit. With such large populations in confined spaces, they become an ideal breeding ground for sea lice. If only the populations could be reduced, it might bring a reduction in sea lice for everyone's benefit. Sadly, as the population of farm salmon grows, the population of wild Atlantic salmon is in terminal decline. Is this a coincidence? Evidence would suggest not. Let's aim for a balance. No one wants wild salmon to become extinct. After all, the farmed salmon companies depend on its amazing river leaps to promote their brand while suggesting they live in pristine Scottish waters when the opposite is true. Perhaps densely populated salmon feed pens where salmon are at times eaten alive by sea lice isn't such a compelling marketing proposition. Sea lice on their own have the potential to completely wipe out the wild Atlantic salmon. Let's look toward the Faroe Islands to learn from their government research to protect the Atlantic salmon. What is clear from the latest IUCN classification is that governments and regulators must now do much more to secure a future for this iconic species. Professor Colin Bean, a senior science and policy advisor for NatureScot, said the Red List assessment would help to identify the conservation action that must be taken to halt the decline of the country's most iconic and vulnerable fish species. Atlantic salmon are, in Scotland and elsewhere, experiencing significant declines in the number of returning adult fish. Tackling the causes of decline is a priority for NatureScot and our partners within the Scottish Government, as well as the wild fisheries sector. The decline in numbers of salmon returning to our rivers is stark. The trend is ever downwards. This graph shows the estimated numbers of salmon returning to Scottish coastal waters over the last 50 years. If that trend continues, extinction is likely by 2050. We must act now. We can play our part in saving the iconic salmon. If such cruelty were witnessed above water, society would be horrified. Catch returns on Scottish rivers have dropped year by year since 2010 to levels not seen since records began in 1952. It is up to the government organisations from the Atlantic nations to study the issues at sea and act upon the findings. But closer to home, action must be taken on issues in the river, barriers to migration caused by man-made structures, river pollution, water abstraction and predation. The Industrial Revolution saw water powering paper and cotton mills and hydroelectric schemes. To harness the power of water, dams, weirs and lathes were built. Many still remain today and are major barriers to fish migration. Some incorporated fish ladders, but many barriers are impassable to salmon. No access to potential spawning grounds means the end of the line for many salmon. Barriers sometimes combine with abstraction to cause severe issues for migrating salmon, both for smolts leaving the river and adults returning to spawn. The Erich is a classic example where the upper weir was built to divert water down the Lade to power the mills. The Lade now feeds a hydro turbine and a fish farm. Over-abstraction in low water means the Lade takes most of the water, leaving the river below the weir virtually impassable to salmon, causing them to stay in deeper pools in warming water and exposing them to disease and death. Pollution can be a major problem in rivers when runoff from intensive agricultural sprays and fertiliser makes its way into rivers. Timing of application and proximity to waterways is strictly controlled, but still a problem. Intensive agriculture demands water for growing crops, and abstraction for this has increased with the advent of drier, hotter summers. Abstraction in these hotter, drier conditions causes the river levels to drop considerably to the point where access to the upper spawning grounds is not possible, and returning salmon must hold in deeper pools, waiting for rising levels after rain. Less well controlled and now more of a problem with increasing human populations is when water treatment plants cannot cope with large quantities of water entering from town and city sewers. Raw sewage will cause damage and even death to immature and mature salmon alike. The salmon's life cycle means that it is subject to predation at every stage, from early life as fry to parr and smolts and adult salmon returning to the river to spawn. They are particularly vulnerable as smolts as they gather in thousands to migrate. River predators include brown trout, otters and piscivorous birds, cormorants, goosanders and mergansers. Flocks of cormorants numbering over 100 have been seen on the Tay. The same number of goosanders have been seen massing around the mouths of the Tay tributaries, waiting to kill smolts on their migration. A flock of 75 goosanders preying on migrating smolts which weigh around 100 grams are not long in causing considerable damage, 300 smolts a day. They are exceedingly hungry birds. A recent study of piscivorous bird stomach contents found significant evidence of salmonid species in the contents. The results indicate that on all rivers where there are adequate samples taken, predation on pre-smolts by goosanders and cormorants during autumn and winter could very negatively influence the strength of the smolt run the following spring. Another significant predator is the seal. Numbers have expanded rapidly in recent years, especially in the Tay estuary near Tentsmuir. Adult Tay salmon returning to the spawn must run the deadly gauntlet of seals, some of which will follow pods of salmon well into fresh water off the main river Tay itself. There is still hope to save this wonderful species, but it requires immediate, focused action in a number of areas. The Scottish Government has issued a wild salmon strategy in 2022. And in February 2023 followed this up with an implementation plan which outlines all the issues which must be addressed. As always, the plan has much focus on evidence and science, but the Ghillies and local boards must not be ignored. The Ghillies are guardians of the river, they know every inch of it and are aware of the issues affecting the salmon. As described, there are many issues on the river, but the ones which could make a real difference in parallel to those actions being decided in the plan are removal of barriers, control of predators, and the ability to stock juvenile fish. Control of predators which are protected is an emotive subject, but so is the decline of salmon. We need a much more pragmatic approach to predator control, so we have a balance between predator numbers versus salmon numbers. Even more emotive is the subject of stocking. Undoubtedly, there are examples around the world where stocking policies have failed, probably due to over-eagerness to enhance stocks. Here in Scotland, there are several examples of successful stocking programmes where the managers of these programmes took great care to follow best-in-class procedures to protect the integrity of their river salmon. Indeed, the hatchery at Ammon Bank, run by the Tay Board, is a world-class facility. There is no doubt in the minds of the Ghillies that controlled stocking would be a valuable contribution to protecting the Atlantic salmon on the Tay. We've asked some of them to share their expertise and observations in the hope it will trigger positive actions.
My name's Bob Mason. I'm President of Perth and District Anglers Association and also a trustee of the Tay Ghillies Association. I joined the Tay Ghillies Association to help them in their fight for the survival of the Atlantic salmon. I make one plea: we need action now, or this iconic fish will become extinct. The Atlantic salmon is in serious decline and it needs real action now, or that I believe, and a lot of people believe, that it might actually become extinct in our lifetime.
We need factual information that we're going to act on.
I think that's true, and I think they also need to speak to people like you and the rest of the Ghillies on the Tay, because you're the guys who understand the river, you know what the status of the salmon is, and if they don't listen to you, then I believe we're sunk.
My name's Cornelius O'Day. I'm head Ghillie at Taymount here on the mighty River Tay in Scotland. I'm also the chairman of the Tay Ghillies Association and a guideline ambassador.
Local experts have given their thoughts on extraction, predation, regeneration, communities and inclusion.
I'm Robert Kelly and I've been angling for over 60 years. Over the years I've consistently witnessed a serious decline in wild salmon. It would break your heart, it really would. For example, right here on the Erich, there's over-abstraction at this lade. That means at very low water downstream. In fact, sometimes there's no water downstream and the river runs dry. If adult fish can't go to their spawning grounds or return to sea, how are they meant to survive? The young salmon get trapped with nowhere to go There is no need for it. It's not complicated. Remove the barriers and stop taking as much water from the river. I've been saying this for 22 years. The answer is simple, but this needs action now. Time is running out.
I'm Sandy McIntosh, and I've been working on our rivers for over 50 years. If you were to ask me why the wild Atlantic salmon is an endangered species, I'd say predation, predation, predation. It's a major issue on the River Erne, as it is on all our rivers. The goosander is a non-native bird, but yet it is protected. Why? In a few years we'll have lots of them and no salmon. Is that fair? It is a marvellous mother, laying around 12 eggs and raising over 90% of them to maturity. A mature goosander will eat around 4 young salmon every day. I've seen flocks of over 100 on the Tay. That's 400 young salmon every day. The effect on the smolt migration is horrendous. We need balance. We just cannot protect a non-native species at the expense of our wild salmon, which have been in Scotland since the last ice age. It's just not fair. Let's try to get a balance.
I'm Claire Cooper, co-founder and co-director of the Cateran Eco Museum, a museum without walls spread across 1,000 square kilometres of Eastern Perthshire and Western Angus. Our current work is focused on promoting our natural and cultural heritage in ways that encourage climate action and low carbon travel. In my other role as co-director of bioreasoning Tayside, we aim to restore and regenerate our ecological systems, such as our rivers, and help communities in Tayside build resilience in the face of the climate and biodiversity crises. The Cateran Eco Museum started working with the Tay Ghillies Association in 2021, scoping the environmental history of the river and its wild fish story, and contributing to their Smart Rivers data collection for the Errict catchment. That was a great success, and so we decided to collaborate again to seed a bigger catchment-wide regeneration initiative, which has the future of the wild Atlantic salmon at its core. I'm delighted to say that this initiative is now a national demonstrator project under the Riverwoods programme, aimed at bringing new public and private investment into the restoration of the River Errict catchment. And it's also building positive relationships between local people and local wild fish organisations. This broader public involvement and this building of new alliances, as we're doing, will be key to reversing the decline of the salmon in our rivers. Our own health and well-being, as well as the health and well-being of our natural ecosystem and our precious wild fish, depend on all of us turning things around.
I watch salmon returning to the Tay in absolute awe. What a journey they make. It still amazes me when I see them return every year. It really is an iconic fish. I've also watched its decline, and it makes me so sad, not just for angling, but for Scotland's rivers and seas. The number of tourists from home and abroad are declining too. It's hurting local businesses, and it seems that nobody cares. Our rural communities will be wiped out. But do you know what? It'll hurt our young people the most. When you see what's happening here every day, we believe that stocking from world-class hatcheries can help preserve the wild salmon. At the moment, stocking is controlled by scientists who seem to believe it won't help. Well, I'm no scientist, but I can see with my own eyes that we need to apply the precautionary principle. We should at least run a pilot programme using world-class techniques available in Scotland to show what real success looks like. We'll have to act quickly though, or it'll be too late.
So with your 70 years experience of fishing, George, it's a great privilege for me to be sat next to you today, having this chat. But you did allude to some things that you would like to share with some of the problems that salmon face. In the time span you've spent on the river, I guess you're best placed than anyone to give your view on the decline of salmon through your period of employment and fishing career on this river.
Well, going back to suppose about to the early 70s, The numbers coming into this river was astronomical. To give you an instance, say 1969 I think it was, I had a copy of the catches at the nets in this river they were getting, and in 1969 they had 96,000 salmon and gills up until the 15th of August when they took the nets off. And ever since that, they took the nets off, and lo and behold, it didn't make a blind bit of difference to start with, because there were still fish coming back in. But as it began to dwindle, and it dwindled and dwindled and dwindled, it became quite serious. And as a result of which, an awful lot of research was put into the river, and I felt at that time there should have been more practical work done on the river, i.e. clearing burns and different things and assisting the district board in one thing or another. But it dwindled and dwindled, and I can always remember that in the 70s and the 80s, in the springtime, January, February, probably March as well, you could walk on any beat you wanted on the river, and there were hundreds of kelts dead and dying at the river bank. Nowadays you could walk the whole river and you'll not see one. So something has happened to the numbers. I don't know what the real cause of it is. We can go and blame the district boards, we can blame the scientists, and we can do everything else. But there must be something serious happening at sea.
It's obvious to me that salmon fishing is a sport of inclusion. What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, in my opinion, salmon fishing is for everybody, as is other methods of fishing. But we're talking about the River Tay today, and salmon fishing, unfortunately the government do not think that salmon fishing is for everybody. They think it's only for those and such as those who have plenty of money. Everybody loves fishing.
Yes.
It gets you away from everything. You can go out there and every cast that you have, it's your bait's coming round and you're saying to yourself, here we go, it'll come this time, it'll come this time. It gets everybody out in the open air, away from drugs, away from everything else. And to me, it is a fantastic way of doing it. I've been the luckiest man alive to do what I've done. I've put a lot of work into it, I will say that, but at the same time, I've been very lucky, very, very lucky.
I'm Tay Ghillies and I'm a member and past president of Perth and District Anglers Association. For about 60 years I've been a member. With over 200 members from all walks of life, it's a great community. People talk a lot about inclusion these days, but we've been welcoming members of all ages, genders and ethnic groups and people with disabilities for as long as I can remember. Everyone's equal as far as we're concerned. For around £23 a month, members enjoy angling on some of the best beats on the Tay and its tributaries. It's funny, some people think it's only for rich folk, but that's not the case. Most people tell me it's great value. Personally, I can't think of anything better for your well-being. Think about it, what a beautiful part of Scotland this is. What's not to like? You know, there are many salmon fishing clubs all over Scotland. Every single one offering affordable salmon angling on our rivers. And let's not forget the money it brings into our rural communities. Hotels, pubs, bakers and all the wee shops on our village streets. Can I tell you one thing? If we don't act now, it'll be lost forever. I'm not an emotional person, but this really upsets me.
So a wee story for you. When we first moved here a couple of years ago, everybody in Tayside seems to be into fishing. So the plumber who came to help us with some problems in the house, he turned out to be a champion fisherman, a champion caster, and was away off to the Canadian World Championships of Casting. So he said, you must join the PDAA, and you've got a really good beat just across the river, so you should go down and try it. So we did. And then we just got hooked, and we went to the Scottish Game Fair, and we met all the guys from the PDAA at the stall at the Game Fair, and they couldn't have been nicer. And I got a free casting lesson at the Game Fair, and I've just really never looked back. I find everybody's been just so welcoming, really, to anybody coming fishing. Well, it's fantastic for your mental health. You're out all day in the fresh air and the sunshine. You're concentrating on a new skill that you maybe haven't learnt before, and you have the benefit of nature all around you. What could be better than this, learning about the natural environment and fishing at the same time?
I'm Danny Morey. I'm a fishing guide and instructor on the River Spey. I've been fishing since I could stand. My father, I always joke, was the original feminist, and having a daughter decided that he'd teach me to do everything a son could do. And for me, fishing isn't just my livelihood, it's a whole way of life. I think those early years with my father are something that I want to pass on to my own children and to other people's children, and to get as many people onto the riverbank as possible so that everyone can have a chance to feel the way that I do when I walk onto that riverbank. As a mother, I'm very concerned about the conservation side of things. I feel a huge conscience that I don't want the salmon to die out on my watch. It's not something that I would be comfortable leaving the next generation with. I feel that there is a lot that we can do as guides, as gillies, as anglers to try and save the salmon for future generations.